Thanks to Scripps College, Scripps Presents, and the Mary Routt Endowed Chair, which supports the appointment of a visiting writer who teaches in the spring semester every year here at Scripps. I've had the honor of holding this position this semester, and it's truly been an honor and a pleasure to meet so many wonderful colleagues and to feel so welcomed here. And shout out to my students, my brilliant students who make me so excited about fiction every week. I'm so excited. So the Mary Routt appointment includes the privilege of inviting a distinguished writer to give a reading on campus, and I couldn't be more thrilled to introduce tonight's special guest, Karen Tei Yamashita. She is the author of 8 books. I just confirmed that. It is actually 8 books backstage, including the novel I, Hotel, a finalist for the National Book Award, and most recently, Sansei and Sensibility, a story collection published in 2020. Karen has been honored by the Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Book Foundation and the John Dos Passos Prize for Literature, among many other accolades. She is Professor Emerita of Literature and Creative Writing at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Karen's impressive body of work includes novels, short stories, essays, memoirs, and plays. Her writing defies conventions of genre and form. She works in what literary critics may call historical fiction, magic realism, postmodern maximalism, social and political satire, and through it all, Karen writes with a sly, sardonic sense of humor and a vast intellectual curiosity about this absurd world we live in. Reading her work teaches us to see carefully, compassionately into the concerns of the human heart and the radical hope that keeps it beating day after day. Please help me welcome Karen Tei Yamashita.
Felt like I was coming down to joy. What did I see? What did I hear? When I was coming down, had a break.
Well, I wanted to play that, but let's see. Let me go back. No. Here. No. Here. Okay, let me just say this. I wanted to play that. That's Belle from the movie Belfast. I don't know if you'd seen it, but Kenneth Branagh had written a coming-of-age story about his family in Belfast during the 1960s Troubles, about anti-Catholic riots in Northern Ireland and the bigotry and the hatred expressed by Protestants against Catholics, and the Branagh family's response to that hatred. And perhaps you've seen the film, but in any way, you know of the history. And perhaps you'll see the relationship of that story to the one I'm going to recount today. And then, let's go away. But I want to thank Jean Chen Ho and for inviting me here today. And thank you to Marcy and to Lizzie and all of you for being here today. I'm really honored to be here. A few months ago, well, actually, it's more than a few months, about maybe sometime last year, I was asked to give a talk to high school students who'd been on lockdown because of the COVID pandemic. And so we've all been confined for several years now, and it's kind of amazing to be here. And, well, I see a few of you with masks, but things have really changed, and changed for all of us. And I think the presenters at the school wanted to encourage students to envision a more positive outlook. And so they asked me to talk about joy. So this is what's happening today. So, hey, let me see if I can do this. Joy, joy to the world, all the boys and girls. Joy to the fishies in the deep blue sea. Joy to you and me. Sorry. I took a nap and I just woke up. I was like, I could do that again. I was like, no. Okay, so growing up in our house, there were 2 books on the subject of joy. So when I thought about this, and I thought, well, this is inappropriate for high school, but you're fine, right? There was The Joy of Cooking and The Joy of Sex. Now, The Joy of Cooking was the book that taught me how to cook. And The Joy of Sex was kind of hidden, and we'd have to sneak into our parents' bedroom to take a look at that rather forbidden joy. I can't say I learned anything from it. But when you think about it, food and sex, how and what we eat, and how and why we define our bodies as gendered and in relation to others, these are the 2 joys that can and keep defining our lives and our worlds. And I suppose you can speak of many other aspects of joy and a desire, and the routine of living among others. But the significant sensibility here is joy, not something forced or forbidden, but the simple pleasure of making and partaking in a meal and being alive with others. A joy for life, a life of joy. And as a writer, I find joy in the thinking space and activity of writing. To be honest, I can be writing anything. It can be a text message or a grocery list or a painful memory, and this makes me happy. Composing this talk today was also a pleasure and a special gift. Let me see if I can read this better here. Okay, there we go. So this is my most recently published book. It's called Sansei and Sensibility, and I'm going to read from parts of an essay that is in this book. And that essay is Konmari. What this has to do with joy, you'll see by and by. Now, Konmari is about a cross-country road trip I took with my niece, Lucy, and we were traveling from Providence, Rhode Island, to Los Angeles. And the title, Konmari, you will see, is a pun. The expression komarimasu in Japanese translates to something like, oh, I'm in trouble, or I'm worried, I'm bothered, I'm embarrassed, I'm stumped. Komarimasu. But konmarimasu for us. So, when your sister comes over to your house and finds you cleaning and discarding stuff, she mentions something about Marie Kondo and hoarding. And you query, Marie who? Kondo, she says, and you think about how maybe you knew a Sansei named Kondo way back when. But then she says, you don't know who she is. And to rub it in, she says, she's translated into maybe 40 languages, published all over the world. When did this happen? Geez, it's got to be a couple of years ago. She doesn't say, where have you been? She could, but she knows. You've been right here all this time with all your junk. Your sister opens a New York Times magazine and points to a cute Japanese woman in on a pink background in a pose with her finger pointed up and her foot raised behind her in a small kick. It's the J pose, translated as joy, and you both imitate what you figure is the pose for the kanji joy. You scan the article, a book on tidying. It's great literature, you smirk. Say, your sister reminds you, that woman is laughing all the way to the bank. Right, when have you ever laughed on your way to the bank? So you ask, "You've read it?" "Yeah," she says, "picked it up in a pile at Costco for $9.49. 3 million copies sold, a New York Times bestseller. You size up the title, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, the Japanese Art of Decluttering and Organizing. Everything is in lowercase like it's in hiragana, except the J in Japanese, translated from the Japanese by Kathy Hirano. Where have you been? While you were dozing, the Japanese invented the art of tidying. And it's not just an art, it's a method. The Konmari method, like the Suzuki method, or Kumon, the math method. It's like Zen and the art of fill in the blank. Except Kondo was a Shinto shrine maid, and you think about Shinto shrines completely rebuilt every 20 years. Why not? A complete package for transformation. In the first pages, you discover that satisfied clients of the Konmari method have realized dramatic changes in their lifestyle and life perspective. Every sort of transformation from the loss of 10 pounds to marital divorce. You read that the average amount of stuff discarded by Kondo's clients can be from 20 to 45 garbage bags per person. In a family of 3, 70 bags. At some point, she writes that the sum total of all the stuff discarded by her clients would exceed 28,000 bags and the number of items over 1 million. Knowing garbage, gomi, collection in Japan, the staggering number of garbage bags makes you reel. Where did it all go? Into the Tokyo Bay. You glance over at the corner of the study that could be your Tokyo Bay. Boxes filled with letters, photographs, artifacts, and piles of supporting documentation. A massive dumping place of the thing called your family archive. Since the death of all of your dad's siblings, your cousins have been konmarin, the last effects of saved memoria, into boxes and mailing them to you. You open boxes that exude the musty air of basements and flutter up dust that could be 100 years old. On page 115, Kondo writes, "People never retrieve the boxes they send home. Once sent, they will never again be opened." A photograph, she suggests that you remove them from their albums. Look at each one by one, then toss. You handle the crumbling spines of old-fashioned, obsolete albums, and you understand the urge never to open these boxes. But it's your own fault. Didn't you agree to this noble preservation of family history? Besides, there could be treasure in their boxes, or the missing code to some family secret. You collect by date the old correspondence, handwritten letters, often 5 pages long, and read through that period when your folks were shipped off to concentration camps with only what they could carry. I'm assuming here you know that during World War II, 120,000 Japanese American immigrants were removed from the Pacific West Coast and imprisoned in concentration camps. The only crime they'd committed was that they looked like the enemy. You know they burned and buried stuff, stored the rest in the church gym. Some folks left their belongings in boarded shelters or with neighbors. After the war, they'd return home to find their stuff plundered. Kondo says, letting go is even more important than adding. But you know no one said thank you for bringing me joy or I love you before saying sayonara to all the rest of the stuff they couldn't carry to camp. So you fly into Providence, Rhode Island, where your niece Lucy has packed the back of her Honda Fit with her stuff. there is some room left in the fit for your roller bag, your backpack, your rice cooker, and you. Your sister has charted a course across the country through 7 of the 10 Japanese-American internment camps. The goal is to bring the Fit and Lucy home, but you are calling this the incarceration road trip. First stop, Washington, D.C. You meet Noriko Sanefuji, museum specialist at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. Noriko will curate the Executive Order 9066 Japanese Incarceration and World War II exhibit, scheduled to open in 2017 on the annual Day of Remembrance. She shows Lucy and you the room and corridors that will house the incarceration exhibit, explaining the complications of limited space, flow of information, and the politics of presentation. Then you get special entry into the back rooms and basement of what's known as America's Attic. Noriko has arranged a small array of objects on a table she hopes to put out on display. She pulls on black gloves and carefully caresses the pink crochet of a child's dress, aged by wear and years. The dress was handmade by a mother in camp, and it is accompanied by a portrait photograph of a little girl in the same dress, standing with her family arranged formally in their barrack home. Noriko pulls forward another object, a cotton cloth embroidered with 1,000 red knots, nickel and dime secured in the threads, and the words, "God bless." An Issei mother made this sennin body for her soldier son to be worn around his waist to protect him in battle. Each item is handled with gloved care and stored with protective cellophane in acid-free paper and boxes. You remember the ceremonial observance of Kondo's method, plus her practical advice for storing the stuff you don't toss. Don't hang, fold. Folding is fun. She writes on page 74, Japanese people quickly grab the pleasure that comes from folding clothes, almost as if they were genetically programmed for this task. You note the sennin body, each fold remembered in a yellow tinge, the sweat and grime of battle, the unspoken story of a soldier's survival, a mother's prayer. Your first incarceration stop, the southeastern edge of Arkansas along the Mississippi River and McGehee. McGehee, the local town that's converted its old train depot into the Jerome Rower Interpretive Museum and Visitor Center. Susan Gallion, the museum's curator and host, greets you with Southern hospitality and stories of Jerome and Rower internees and their descendants who've preceded Lucy and you to this moment. Lucy will probably remember the precise context of Susan's Southern phrase, God doesn't make junk. But you'll only remember the phrase that will follow you like GPS satellite on that long road trip. The probing matter of human-made junk left behind in Camp Museum after Camp Museum. At the Rower site, you walk around the remake of a mini guard tower on a gravel road rising in a field of cotton and push buttons on the placard in order to hear the disembodied voice of George Takei, AKA Mr. Sulu, tell you about life circa 1942 and his boyhood relationship to the present desolation of the landscape and the snakes and mosquito-ridden bayou cleared by inmates. You think you could be beamed up now, please, but you walk down the gravel road trying to ignore the oppressive and scalding humidity, looking for the cemetery. Stone monuments mark bodies left behind and bodies sacrificed in battle, and outside the human burial perimeter, a dog named Pappy. You imagine the deep, surreal voice of George Takei departing in his starship to that final frontier where no man has gone before. God doesn't make junk. For over a decade, you've been collecting your family junk with some idea that it might be useful research material for another book. You didn't know what book or what story, but that's the way writing is. If you knew, you wouldn't bother. By the time you propose the road trip to Lucy, you've mostly finished the book. The road trip is an excuse, a kind of finishing up of the project, realizing and experiencing what had been read in letters and seen in photographs. Maybe if you had done the road trip before, the book would be a different book. But circumstances make the archive real and the real places surreal. Or perhaps the contemplation of the past and its memory is the work of the written book, and the realization of being at locations of incarceration finally visceral and unwritable. Literally and figuratively getting out of Dodge, Lucy and you make your escape in the trusty Fit. Then saunter over the Kansas border into the quiet town of Grenada on the eastern edge of Colorado. The Amachi Museum is a small house on the corner of Gough and Irwin Streets across from a grain silo. You peruse the Preserve America information signs outside the museum, and Lucy calls the number on the door. 5 minutes later, John Harper pulls up, and the Amachi Preservation Society turns out to be John Harper and his crew of high school students. John arrived sans students, it's a school day, but he's a one-man show. He's the principal, the coach, and the AP teacher of the local high school, a former city councilman and the director of the Amachi Preservation Society. The museum began as a high school project, then John got the city council to secure a 99-year land lease for the Amachi internment site. John says the students do everything except run the tractor to mow the brush and maintain the roads. Too dangerous, he says. He does the work himself, so he's also the maintenance man as well. If the site goes over to the National Park Service, they'll handle all that. Big loss will be the students won't have hands-on access to the collection. But, says John, I need to retire. Considering his energy, you don't quite believe him. Inside the small, how do I go back? Oh, no, I don't think, okay. Oh, no. Okay, there we go. Inside the small house is packed with what John says is the largest and most varied collection of Japanese-American internment artifacts of any of the campsites. Usually, John's students run the museum, trained by John and university scholars to guide visitors, curate exhibitions, participate in site archaeology. He opens a box with a recent acquisition, a dark green 1944 Amachi High School sweater. Some collector contacted John and wanted $1,000 for the sweater, said if John didn't take it, he had a World War II collector waiting to buy it. John said he didn't have that kind of money and offered the guy $35. The students got mad. They wanted it for their planned exhibit on high school in camp. Eventually, as John suspected, the seller came around for reasonably less, but everything else is donated. We don't turn anything down. If they send it to us, it has a story and meaning. You observe a glass jug that could be, well, any glass jug, except that it held sake distilled locally and consumed by internees. You snap a photo. Riding north from Colorado into Wyoming 2 days later at the Heart Mountain Interpretive Center, you meet Darlene Boss, who tells Lucy and you her story of growing up in nearby Cody, in one of the camp's repurposed barracks reshaped into an Elle ranch-style homesteading home. You think you've spotted these barracks, likely scattered all over the region as shotgun houses and barns, and maybe haunted. Well, haunted with old history, since Darlene became curious and studied that history, eventually volunteering to work at the Heart Mountain site. Now she's the center's marketing and development manager. From childhood, she said, she argued with her father, a U.S. military veteran. When the Interpretive Center finally opened, and both her parents had also volunteered their energy to build the meditation garden, her father finally said to her, "You were right." She admits she's always on the lookout for visitors like her dad, hoping to change their minds. She says, "I love my work." The Heart Mountain Center is impressively curated, packing history into a small and concentrated space, deeper layers of documentation and oral histories for visitors who care to take the extra time. What the road trip reveals is the broader nature of your family archive. It's being subsumed into one museum project after another, curating and deciding the stories of the past. Every museum and its collection is different and yet the same. Same in the urge to preserve, to historicize, to teach, to place values, and to entice you to enter. To you, books and museums are much the same. Your road trip, like every other account of a road trip, is an open and physical book. You retrace the steps of others, stand in the places of their discovery, loss, and memory. Books and museums curate stories, a vision and a version of events and truth. 2 days after Heart Mountain, you come through Yellowstone to visit Minidoka in Idaho. Then Lucy and you take the fit south into Utah to a town called Delta and the campsite named Topaz, the jewel of the desert. It's a desert, all right. The clear blue sky sweeps the horizon, sun and hot wind unrelenting. You squint across the landscape of salt desert shrub and greasewood and follow your guide, Jane Beckwith's sure steps, sinking into the parched and cracked crust of soil that turns into fine dust. Jane is a retired teacher who, like John Harper, taught history through Delta's local stories, storing internment artifacts in her house until she founded, with the passionate efforts of a lifetime, the Topaz Museum. Jane points to the outline of rocks and stones that mark the garden and the threshold of Barrack 6-3F in Block 6 and ushers you through an imaginary door. You walk around the 20 by 24-foot perimeter of your family's confinement, home to 13 people from 1942 to 1945, and scuff around in the remains of rusty nails, wood scraps, broken pieces of cement foundation. Jane picks up rocks and identifies them geologically. What you learn is that every rock and stone had to be brought to the area by the internees to create the pathways over the slimy mud pools surrounding the barracks and the gardens that have since disappeared, every rock and every stone. You want to find a piece of pottery or perhaps a rusty hardware of your family's abandoned waffle iron. Or even if you found it, you'd be prohibited from taking anything from the site. All that stuff broken and discarded, every rock and every stone belonged to the place, to be left untouched, scorched by the sun, weathered, and returned to the earth. An archaeological site whose desolate surface memory is now a sacred memorial. Kondo's admonition that clutter is the failure to return things to where they belong, her insistence on simplicity and minimalism, all this only reminds you of what you assume is the Japanese American motto: leave it cleaner than you found it. How many picnic areas and communal kitchens have we left cleaner than we found them? How many concentration camps? Kondo writes, no matter how wonderful things used to be, we cannot live in the past. The joy and excitement we feel here and now are more important. But you have the deep urge to exchange the word wonderful for awful and sit in that spot and weep. To be fair to Kondo, she could be your daughter. Okay, unfair. A Yonsei raised in a capitalist consumer society with great privilege. No war, no refugee boat, no exile from genocide, no trail of tears, no underground railroad, no Great Depression, no borderlands, no eyes on the prize. But she is still a product of the long post-war. You wonder what people in what 40 languages and have required Kondo's advice. Can the trauma of the hoarder be undone with the methodic and ceremonial movement of clothing, books, paper, miscellany, and sentimental value rendered into honorary trash? She says, the question of what you want to own is actually the question of how you want to live your life. This could be the succinct clarification and the synthesis of Buddhism and Marxism, the revolution you've been anticipating. Voila. Kondo might say that this stuff in your family archive and this stuff in all these internment museums were parted with to launch them on a new journey. You cogitate the joy spark thing. And you think about simple furniture made from wood scraps, the pink crochet dress, the sennin body, the green high school sweater, the jug of sake. Jane Beckwith pauses with the last story. She remembers bringing a class of children to visit the Topaz site, and one boy who was particularly rambunctious, jumping and noisily running about. A girl also his age admonished her classmate. Be quiet, she advised him. Don't you know? They are here. You will finally also visit the Manzanar campsite under the Sierra Nevadas between the desert towns of Independence and Long Pine. You reflect as you enter California that you and Lucy have traveled through those red states and communities that will vote for the then current, now ex-president and his race and religious-based mandate against immigrants and refugees. But that in each of those remote sites of Japanese American incarceration, there are monuments, interpretive centers, museums, and real people, volunteers and docents, that all decry the racism, hatred, and fear that unjustly imprison citizens and honest, hardworking immigrant families. These sites and their caretakers stand as places of evidence, accountability, resistance, and hope. You return home to your personal Tokyo Bay, a land-filled space of junk you cannot abandon. You know you cannot hold each item and feel for the spark of joy. Kick your foot back and point your finger up in the joy position. If there is a joy, it is a painful joy. You ponder the thought that Lucy has beamed up most of it into a digital space and reorganized it into a website story, a new journey. You reflect on the lives of Jane Beckwith and John Harper and every other curator and keeper of history along your incarceration road and trip. You think that keeping the stuff, saving it, might also be a way of transforming your life. Thanks. So I'm going to just leave it like that. Or they turn it off? Oh, wait, I know. Just. Okay.
Okay, you sit over there. Hi, Karen. Thanks for being here. Let me get my notes together. Thank you. So thank you for that beautiful, very moving reading. Can you give us, so that essay is in conversation with your previous book, Letters to Memory. Can you tell us a little bit about, there was a line in this piece that you read, which was, maybe that book would have been different if I had taken this road trip beforehand. Can you say a little bit about how this piece came to be and give us a peek into how it relates to your previous book and tell us about the previous book?
The previous book is Letters to Memory, and I had been working on it for several years, and it was based on, well, you saw that, all those boxes, right? So the last of my father's siblings had died, my Aunt Io, and when she died, I guess it gave me permission to really write about the family. But what had happened was that when one of my aunts died, I'd gone to her apartment in Chicago, and there was a manila folder of all these, the copies of these letters. And when I looked at the letters, they were all the letters that she had written to her family during the war. And she had really awful handwriting, so she always typed everything, but they were 5-page letters. And she kept carbon copies. In many of the cases, she made many more copies, so she would send one to her mother, who was my grandmother in camp, and then she would send another to my father, who was studying in Chicago, and then another to someone else, maybe in Philadelphia. So she was sending carbon copies out to everyone. But anyway, she had kept them. And I just stole them.
Well, did anybody else want them?
Well, I don't know that anyone else did. I just looked at my other aunt and said, I'm taking these. Mm-hmm. But I had them for years, and I thought about, and I didn't really even read them. Mm-hmm. And finally, I took a look at them, and then I thought, wait, what happened to the other letters? So then I went through my father's stuff, and I saw his letters to my aunt. And then I began to think, well, there are more letters. Mm-hmm. And so then when Elle died, I collected her letters as well. And so we began to have the story of between all of there's 7 siblings, so they were all writing to each other during the war. And I thought, well, this is important stuff. It gives us a documents over time of this story, of what happened to them during the war. So that's how it started. But I didn't know what I was going to do with any of this. and I knew I wanted to write it. And so at some point, I think my cousins generally began to know that I had these letters. And, well, they began to know, they thought that I was going to write a family history. And
Just for the family, not for the public, you mean?
no, I was going to write it, yeah, it would be public, but it would be a family history, right? And my mother was still alive in those days, and so they all, and I hadn't seen them for years. One of them I hadn't seen since I was a kid when I was 13. And they all arrived, all en masse, and the excuse was to see my mom. And they also brought all these albums, and they brought boxes and boxes of stuff from their family because their mother had just died. And they said, okay, Karen, but we want you to know, we want to make sure you're going to write about our mother in a positive way. And we want you to know that it wasn't her fault that, our father didn't take in grandma. And I don't know, there was all this argument. So they wanted to make sure that there would be a good story about their mother. But their father was my uncle. I mean, my father's oldest brother. And I knew with the controversies, and I said, I'm not going to write about that. If you want to write about that, that's your business. I'm going to write about something else. And what I was really interested in when I read these letters was, so they turned over more stuff, and I had more letters, and it's a long thing. So, but what I became interested in were all the connections between people who were helping, Quakers, the Fellowship of Reconciliation, and also Howard Thurman, who is an African-American minister, who was a friend of my father's and also a friend of my aunt's. And I thought about all of these people outside of the family and what that relationship of the internment to civil rights. So that was what I was interested in. My cousins didn't know this. They thought I was going to write, the dirty laundry story. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wasn't going to do that. And as I started it, my nieces, friends, the next generation became also interested in the work. Mm-hmm. And I just hired them to digitize the material, to look over it, to collate it, to think, in detail about what was going on. And in particular, my niece, Lucy, was really interested in it. And she went through the letters very meticulously and helped me to collate them and gather them up. And then she really set out to put together the website and create her own understanding of what the story was of our family.
So the website now, and this is one of the slides, is your family archives are now a part of, they're collected at UC Santa Cruz.
Yes.
So I want to ask you about your writing process because this is so much material. I mean, you mentioned that other family members wanted you to write some other kinds of story, and you were like, I'm going to write my own story, contextualizing my family's letters within this greater story of the civil rights movement and all the other people who helped through your dad's church and so forth. What did the first draft look like? I mean, this is a question about the road trip story, perhaps. Maybe that's more easily contained to tell. But what did the first draft look like? And then what sort of editing and revision, because we've been talking about that in my class, what was that process like?
I don't know how other people, well, I guess I do know how other people, I think other folks, other writers write more organically. I don't. I structure my work out because I don't have time to rewrite it so many times. So when I thought about what was going on here, I wanted. Okay. Well, this is a long story. You want to hear it?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh. Okay. So. I like to have dinner parties.
Why haven't I ever been invited to one?
Okay, all right, because you don't live near me. So I like to cook, and I like to invite folks over. But there was a moment at which I thought about my dad, and all of the archive, his sermons I also had in the archive, his letters, the family letters, and I thought maybe this is really about my dad. And in thinking about that, I thought I should invite some folks over whose thinking and scholarship and philosophical ideas would be of interest to him. And I did it because I thought I needed to know my father in a different way or better. So if I brought these scholars over to my house, they could talk to me about ancient Palestine. They could talk to me about things that my father was interested in. So I did. Okay, so I brought one of my friends is a scholar of ancient Greece, Greek literature, but she's also a scholar of Indian thinking and philosophy. So the Mahabharata, for instance. And then I had a friend who is a scholar of ancient Palestine, another friend who does ancient and classical Buddhist literature and art. And so I brought those three people to my house for dinner, and they had never met each other. And I had dinner for them and feted them, and then I said, okay, you have to promise to come tomorrow. Now that you've met each other and had dinner together, you come tomorrow, I will make a brunch for all of you, and I want you to have a conversation. I'm just going to listen to you talk about your scholarship and what you're interested in, because I thought all these ancient ideas could meet, and my father would have been interested in that. Later, I also invited another friend who does work with Native Americans in America. And I thought that was the other thing. And then I had one more friend I thought, anyway. So I brought them and they had breakfast. I made brunch for them. And I had another friend record it. And later I took the recordings and copied them. I have that, transcribed them. And then I started, and they all asked me, why are we doing this? And I said, I don't know. I don't know. I just wanted to listen to you talk. So that was the beginning of that.
Okay.
And then there was the material in the letters. And I started to look at the material in the letters and also their conversation. And then I also went to read their scholarship. I went to read their dissertations, any of their work. I read all of it because I didn't really know what they were doing. And I tried to understand it. And so it was a conversation I was having with my father in the sense that I was imparting this knowledge that I was, it's a little confusing, isn't it?
Well, you were creating a space.
I was creating
and you
yeah.
were and you were trying to figure
Right.
out what the book's structure was going to
But
be.
also, and so what they became, each of these folks became, each of them became the muse for my conversation with my father. So I decided that I would write to them letters, but also engaging them with their scholarship and their learning. And to think of them as storytellers. So that's what happened.
And so when you came up with that as the structure, you're saying there wasn't much revision then. It just all sort of came out from that.
After I structured it, so I thought, okay, these were letters. First, there were books. And I thought the first book would be, the letters would be to talk about, I thought to talk about poverty, because after I'd finished reading, my friend is Jodal Hamas, and he was really talking about forgiveness, and but also he was talking about how forgiveness is something that happened with the beginnings of Christianity, because that was a radical idea, to forgive. Now, what we're talking about is forgiving debt. So this is a thing that happens when Jesus preaches forgiveness, that you forgive debt. But before, debt was not forgiven. And also, in many societies, it was not forgiven for years. I mean, that's why the French Revolution happened. So I was thinking about that. And so that was Letters to Poverty. And I began, that's what began it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And this story that you read today, or this essay that you read today, it's in the second person voice. So it's kind of a letter to yourself. Would you say that?
Yeah, I don't know why. It's kind of nasty to do you. I don't know, sounded right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to open it up for some questions. We don't have very much time left, but are there questions from the audience? If you have one, please raise your hand. And we have a mic that's going to come around. So here comes the mic.
Hi. So apologies to the larger audience, but I have kind of a personal question. So from your writing, it sounded like your family was incarcerated at Topaz. That's where my grandma was. I've never visited the site, and I actually haven't visited any of the concentration sites. And my question is do you think I should?
Sure. I mean, do you want to?
I honestly think I'm a bit scared too.
Oh, no, there's nothing scary about it. Okay, Topaz has a museum, and the museum is excellent. It's a beautiful museum. And the museum is in a town called Delta. So the museum is interpretive site. There's photography, but there's also artifacts from the camps, and you can see the story within the museum. And from there, you can drive out to the site, which is about, would you say it's about a mile out? I don't know. Yeah, you can drive out to the site, and there's a map of the site, and if you can find out when you're at the museum where your grandmother lived, your grandparents lived, where the barracks were, and you can kind of map it out. And if you're lucky, you can actually get somebody to go out there with you and show you where the barracks were. So,
was that your first time, or had you been there before?
No, I had been there once before.
Had you been scared to go the first time?
No, I didn't want to go. Why? What do you want to go there for? It's in the middle of the desert and nowhere. No.
That too.
I mean, when we were kids, my cousin said that my aunt and uncle brought them out to the site, and they wouldn't get out of the car because they said, oh, it's too hot. Why do you want to be here? And why are we here? So they thought it was nonsense to be there. I didn't. They wanted, they wanted to go eat and have ice cream. And I remember I brought my grandson there, and he said, I'm going to stay in the car. It's just really hot out there. It was 110 degrees. It was true. And he said, I'm going to stay in the car, and it's air-conditioned in here, and I want to go out there. And I said to him, you're going out. Your great-grandmother lived there, and she lived there for, over a year. And if she could have lived there in that heat you can get out of the car for 15 minutes. But, so I don't think she'd be scared. I think it's very meaningful to see the space and to learn the stories. The stories are really remarkable. And there are many stories that both the museum tell and you can hear, you can learn. Yeah.
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
You should go.
Yeah, go.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe just one more question, and then, yeah, Ryan.
Hi, thank you so much for coming today. I just had a question about just your writing practice. A lot of writers, when they talk about just the actual act of writing, talk about it as kind of a grueling process, hard to like get down and sit on the table and do it every single day. But you talked at the beginning about that writing process, regardless of what you're writing, is being filled with joy. And I was just wondering what keeps that joy in it day after day.
Well, I just love to write. I mean, that's the only thing it's the creative space that I live in. So, but I'm very aware of everything I write. There's an awareness about it. So, but that's the way I'm alive. So I would say that. But I always have a project, and it's a creative work that's always running through my, I don't know how other writers think about that. Yeah.
You don't ever have writing difficulties, bad days?
Well, when I get stuck, I just cook and I clean the house, or I take a nap. Yeah.
I have one last question. Do you have any advice for maybe the young writers in the audience? And an emerging writer like myself who only has one book, you have 8 books. Any words of wisdom you want to leave us with?
I'm always asked that, but I don't really know what. I think taking risks is advised.
How do you make yourself take a risk? And how do you know you're taking a risk in your writing?
Right. And also getting outside of what you know. Yeah. One of the things that happened to me is that I left this country and I visited Japan. I spent about a year and a half there. And then I spent almost a decade in Brazil. I learned another language. I saw my home from a different perspective. I had to rearrange my mind and my feeling with my body and all of that in a different place. But that was something I thought that was risky, but also it was something that I, had to learn from being outside. So taking those risks were really important for me.
Do something different. Okay. Please join me and thank you, Karen, for being here.
Thank you.